in the world of investment or business, most of the decision making is less about the thing, but mostly about, is it the right thing? Is it fit? Does the person have the skills to do it? Where's the blind spot? What's the thing they're missing? So you're not really investing in a thing. You're investing in an idea of a portfolio of some sort, which then expresses the nature of your relationship to that and what actually you do care about. Strategy is the discovery process. It is finding out what you do, who you are, and that's potential. That's the miracle of it all, is that it's not defined. And in many ways, the process of exploring ourselves defines who we are. I like storytelling. I like connecting the dots. I like solving puzzles. I like finding data that makes sense and putting it together in a way which gives people an insight. So that's very much my flow. There has to be joy. If there is no joy, what's the purpose? I don't believe in role models. We can get something out of everyone, and that everybody has feet of clay. There is nothing that says I should be this other person. I can only be myself, and I will not be someone else. I'm a real believer in the organism, that we're built to be together. So I have 3 words that describe the secrets of my professional success: agility, quick to respond, innovation, and distance, far enough away. I catalyze. I tell stories, which is my unique thing. I add that seed to the fertile soil and watch what happens.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to The Essence of Investing, where we explore the stories, strategies, wit, and wisdom of investors and executives from across Asia and beyond. I'm your host, Jonathan Reckman. My guest today, the one and only Dr. Lola Woetzel, senior partner with McKinsey Company and a multi-generational resident of Shanghai. In this episode, we talk about China, change, investment, leadership, and the essence of strategy, both in business and in life. This was an amazing conversation. Please listen, share, give feedback, and most of all, enjoy. The Essence of Investing is powered by Next Level Communication and by the world of allocators. Next Level Communication helps investors and multinational executives in Asia tell their stories to their most important global stakeholders. Get in touch at reachnextlevel.net to learn more about cross-border IR, strategic communication, and presentation training services. The world of allocators encourages long-term thinking and the adoption of the endowment approach among asset managers in China. Get in touch to join our community of domestic and overseas practitioners to share and learn. I'm a big fan of games as metaphor for life. So chess played perfectly both sides is a draw. Probably. We don't know, right? It hasn't been solved, but it could be. What are other games that you've played that teach you something about risk and profit?
I'm not much of a Go player. Poker, you don't play the cards, you play the person. And so any opportunity could work out. It really depends on who's playing.
And imperfect information.
Yeah, just the person, their habits, their interests, their risk appetite. And so in the world of investment or business, most of the decision making is less about the thing. Sometimes, you can't really rescue a situation, but mostly about, is it the right thing? Is it fit? Does the person have the skills to do it? Where's the blind spot? What's the thing they're missing? Poker teaches us that.
I find that I tend to use these games as a sandbox to experiment with different and really the opposite side of my normal personality. So very specifically in both chess and poker, I can be far more aggressive and risk-taking than I am in my life, in my business dealings. Do you find in your own play or in what you've observed of others that you can judge the man from how they play the game?
I think one can get a sense for that, but it's absolutely what you say, that people play one step removed from their personality. So it's almost like one's inferring something about a person based not on who they are, but how they present. And they present on a game board in a certain way, and sort of say, well, interesting. So that's, is that the person or is that their presentation? And their presentation, if it's something that's not, if it's different from them, one can infer something about them too.
What are some good ways to know who's across the table from you?
Well, first of all, who they hang out with. Just people by the company they keep, and who they think is valuable to hang out with, and the kinds of places and societies that they think are important, and why. Maybe they say that, but just simply where they hang out. You can largely see a lot about people's aspirations and all that from my point of view. But beyond that, I do take people at face value. So if they generally espouse something, then you probably should sort of believe that about them. I rarely run across people who are so completely different from what they say than from who they are. It's very hard to do that, actually. So consistency is difficult to achieve. So people tend to default. So I listen, I watch, and time is the best. I mean, time just allows you more time spent. And you can compress it, of course. You can just have to spend doing unavoidably. But that's why Chinese people, and historically in the history of China, to pivot to that, spent so much time in these negotiations. I mean, it's just, it would take forever. And that was largely because of familiarity. They didn't have it. So you used to have these jokes about guys who would, complain about how the Germans would take forever, but then they would stick to their deals, whereas the Taiwanese would sign something over dinner and then renege on it the next day. And it's like you have a choice.
What are the other choices that really matter?
Apart from how much time to spend with something and someone, I think where. I mean, I'm a very spatial person, so where we show up. Well, Woody Allen, 80% of life is showing up, or 90, whatever it is. Not wrong about that, from my view. That our where we choose to spend our time largely, for me, dictates the influences that we have and and what we value. I mean, it's very hard to value something if you're physically not there, and so I don't really believe in the concept of an absentee owner. And as a result, financial investment is a very interesting area. But it's like, so you're not really investing in a thing. You're investing in an idea of a portfolio of some sort, which then expresses the nature of your relationship to that and what actually you do care about, which is your numbers. So that's a sort of a very different relationship. So let's not try to get these things mixed up.
How does that apply to cross-border investing? And, we can talk about it in the context of US and China, or just more generally, like, investing itself is saying that you want ownership in something that you are not doing in some way, right? Otherwise, you're an entrepreneur. What's the healthiest form of that?
Well, obviously, I mean, it's a truism, but you're investing in a person. I'm not investing in a business. I'm investing in you, or whatever who I think you are. And so I take a very personalistic view about all of this. I invest in areas that. And I've observed people invest in areas about things they genuinely are interested in, because if you're really not interested in it, why bother? I mean, there should be some other things to do with your time. And then, it's especially early stage, of course, it's just about the individual. This is nothing new. Speaking
of investing in a place, you and your family have a long history in China. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about the story?
Technically, my great-grandparents worked on the Hangzhou-Shanghai rail link sometime back in the 1800s. I cannot validate that, but I can say that my grandparents, my father's side, came to Shanghai in 1926 from Hamburg, and then stayed here through 1947. My father was born here in 1930. So Shanghai kids, and they all left in 47, and I came back in, give or take, 83 for the first time, and then raised a family here, and still here. So, yeah.
What has that investment yielded you?
And when I came here, Shanghai was, give or take, 10 or 11 million people, GDP per capita of $5,000. Today, it's 25 million people, GDP per capita of $25,000. So both of those things are pretty extraordinary. To do them both at the same time is pretty amazing. That really hasn't happened ever, anywhere in the history of mankind. So I've been very privileged, I feel, to be part of that story, and still going, still a great story. So
yeah, I think, in terms of still going, and this question comes of what next, right? After you've performed the greatest miracle in human developmental history, how do you follow that act?
First of all, no miracle, just a lot of hard work, roughly in the right direction. Mistakes have been made. So I don't think that we should position this as a sort of extraterrestrial or sort of supernatural kind of event. It wasn't. It was just a lot of hard work, and pretty consistently with, importantly, the most important thing is sort of a great degree of comfort with change. There was, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Fortune or somebody else said, China's secret weapon is it's good with change. It likes change. It's fine with change. And anybody, I guess, who grew up on a farm during the Great Leap Forward or the Cultural Revolution is quite okay with change. That's good. Anything is better than what we went through. So that, I think, is the spirit of reform and is what needs to continue to happen. So that's how we follow it up. We just keep doing that. We are comfortable with change, and we literally put one foot in front of the next and do that. And that means, if that means biohacking, okay, then. So if that means AI and everything and it's all intelligent and your table is talking to you, I guess so. It's like we really don't know. And so that's the challenge. The economists would say that we have had the advantages of backwardness and sort of ran the playbook. And to some extent, that's true. But what was different about China was the wanton disregard for the rules of economics. And it says, like, we're basically going to do this, 3 times as fast as everybody else did. And nobody ever did have 40% investment rates and 40% savings rates. So yeah, the differences were in quantity, perhaps, not so much in kind, but definitely was bigger. Going forward, it's much more about differences in kind. So we will have to figure it out just first principles and let the innovation rip and see where it goes. But the idea that we will change, that it will not stay the same, that Shanghai will not be the same going forward, that we have to be comfortable with. And I personally think most people are quite okay with that.
Morgan Housel has a great new book, Same as Ever, looking at what doesn't change amid the cycles. When you think forward to decades, centuries to come in China, what do you think remains the same?
Well, culture is really sticky. So I think, the Fei Xiaotong was this Chinese sociologist who wrote an influential book called From the Soil or From the Roots. And I read it not that long ago, and it was like, oh my God, I see it now. I see the whole agricultural pattern of China and how this person who was doing a sociology study back in the 50s of China, sort of like his relevance to today, and patterns of behavior, thoughts about marriage, the role of older people in society. I mean, those are sort of agricultural heritage, one might argue, village China. And village China is still very much alive and kicking in the city. So we have villages in the city in a both physical and metaphorical sense. So that's sticky. Now, I believe that urbanization and living in a city changes one genetically and epigenetically. It changes one physically. People get taller and faster, fatter. But they also change in how they think, how they process information, how they save, how they consume. All those things will probably evolve. It's sticky, but they will evolve.
You're not worried about a demographic crisis?
Well, yes and no, in the sense that we know we're going to have one. It's not a crisis if we know it. It's not unexpected. Now, for me, a crisis is defined by we do things differently. We've changed something. That's a crisis. You did something differently because of something. That something was a crisis. So the question is China going to do anything differently because of the demographic trends? And so, yeah, I mean, we give them a few more incentives for people to have another kid. Obviously, it doesn't change anything, and nor does it make a difference particularly. So it's not big enough to matter. So that's not a crisis.
I think it certainly in the Western narrative of China doom-blurging, there's a narrative that China's demographics have doomed it to a kind of shriveling.
Yeah.
Do you think there's...
Well, I mean, I think, if so, I guess Sweden has shriveled and Germany has shriveled and a few other places have shriveled. But no, I think, first of all, China is two things. One is I think they've already recognized that this is not changing. And so what they need is intergenerational equity. They need the ability to take today's savings and pass it to tomorrow's kids. The economy is moving away from the construction of things and the trading of those physically constructed things to the innovation and the building of technology, which is intended to enable, presumably, things that we want to have, like healthcare and education and fun. So that is the question. Can we do that? Continue to do that? At what pace? What does all this then look like? How do we transform our healthcare, education, recreation, banking, services, basically? So that's the future. Either we do or we don't. So we should expect a radically different services economy over the next 10 to 20 years.
I want to talk about what what strategy means in a really basic or conceptual sense, and how it's different or similar at a national level, a firm level, and an individual level, like career strategy, personal life. We can imagine almost in a Confucian sense of, you got to get yourself in order, to get your family in order, to get society in order, to
Right,
get 天下,
right.
and, Where do you start with all this?
So I have a background in political science, a PhD in political science, which qualifies me for nothing, but it just says what I'm interested in. I'm interested in people, and I'm interested in how the stories they tell themselves to allow themselves to get through the day and sort of cope with their existence. And for me, that's what politics is about. It's the study literally of the relationships between people. The science part is like, well, yeah, maybe, but that's the whole point. So I love the storytelling about governance and the philosophies that sort of derive from very fundamental points of view on the nature of human behavior and character and the soul and people being good or evil or neither of the above. And, everything derives from that sort of basic sense. The storytelling, at least, derives from that basic sense of who we are. And I adopt a fundamentally positive, I'd like to think, optimistic, hopeful attitude about the possibilities of what we have. And absent from which is any notion of original guilt or shame or sort of like fundamental sort of debt to something else, so that we are simply brought into this world in order to explore what we have. We don't know. It's not we should not feel a sense of obligation for our existence. It sort of negates the concept of existence. So strategy is the discovery process. It is finding out what you do, who you are, and that's potential. That's the miracle of it all, is that it's not defined. And in many ways, the process of exploring ourselves defines who we are and the capacities that we have. If you sit alone in your room for 40 years of your life, you're not going to be a very interesting person. So you don't know who you are, because we're defined very much, I believe, by our experiences. And sitting alone in a room doesn't give one very much experience. So there are very few things we interact with.
Talk about the balance between doing and reflecting or strategizing, whether it's backwards looking reflection or forwards looking planning and strategy, versus just being there in the immediate and doing things. And that, again, could be at any level.
We should all try not to live in our heads. So, live in the present is a generally good space. Living in the past is possible. It takes a lot of energy. Living in the future is exhausting and is highly risky, usually. So you sort of run out of things to invest. So live in the present. Pause to reflect on one's situation. Be situationally aware. Certainly good advice. When too much pause and there's no forward movement. So my personal philosophy is life is a bicycle. So go too slow, you crash. Go too fast, you crash. There's a pace and a metabolic rate which is appropriate. And that includes looking around and seeing what's going on. So I'm fine with reflection, and I do think that it's helpful. It again, games teach us this. If we don't understand what game we're playing, it may not be winning, certainly, or just enjoying it as much.
So I'm fascinated by this question of whether we do the reflection in a consecutive context. So we do a bunch of stuff, pause, reflect, or whether there is a simultaneous mode in which we are simultaneously doing and reflecting.
Great point, because it goes back to Csikszentmihalyi and being in flow. So in flow is where we are just executing in a parallel kind of way. And so I wouldn't say it's observing it as much as having almost the reverse of being fully enmeshed in the activity, where one is simultaneously experiencing and processing to the point where they don't become separate activities.
How do we develop that, again, as individuals or as a firm?
I think that is exactly what strategy is.
Yeah.
It is for an individual is to find those moments. So the way we know this is that we look at our watch and we say, oh my God, I've been doing this for 3 hours? So that's how one knows, I think, that one is in the right space, that one is doing something where you have simply moved past this notion of effort and energy, that it's something, and it could be as basic as taking a walk, or maybe that's what puts one in flow, or more likely it's an activity of some sort that we become much more good at. And if we are, I think, sort of able to somehow overcome some of the frictions that would otherwise distract us by, for example, being better at something, then it gets that much better.
Is there a view of social value in which if we're all doing our flow state activity, if we're all just being our best for ourselves or for no one else, that is better for the common good?
I would like to think so, but I hesitate mainly because if we're all being unconscious of others while we're doing it, I feel like we, first of all, miss something in terms of society. I also feel like the person, and this is more of a hope for thing, is that they would actually get more out of it if they were doing it in the company of other living beings, and that could be beneficial to them. And so it wouldn't actually be the highest, best use of their flow state. That actually collective flow is an even higher goal than just doing it by oneself.
What's your flow?
I'm a storyteller. I like talking. So I like talking with people, and I like this kind of conversation, frankly. I like connecting the dots. I like solving puzzles. I like finding data that makes sense and putting it together in a way which gives people an insight. So that's very much my flow.
What's the key to storytelling?
In drama. You have to have drama. That means the thing that somebody did not see. The narrative is about that. And it's not to trick someone. It's not to hurt them. In fact, it's to help them very much. To help, because then they appreciate better why they were doing what they were doing. And then they can decide whether they want to do something different.
How do we find our own blind spots? Or do we need consultants or advisors or coaches or
I think
ones?
We need others.
Yeah.
I mean, I find it helpful for me. I mean, that we need others. I mean, looking in the mirror, 照镜子 is always, useful exercise. But oftentimes, it's very hard to see your back or whatever. I mean, you don't know often. So I find having others and sort of, they say people who give it to you straight, but I don't think that's really it. I just think you need others, people to give one feedback, of course. That's why I tend to pay a lot of attention to the type of people that people hang out with. And are they the kind of people that would give you sort of a perspective on the person? Or are they out there, are they hanging around people for some other reason?
So that's interesting. So you're not just judging the people that they're hanging out with, the quality of the people, the caliber, the character, but their motivation for hanging out with them.
Oh, yeah, as much as I can tell.
Yeah.
And really why people are spending the time together. What is it that they're collectively getting out of it?
Aren't all things burning your energy that could be used
but
for other?
There's a trajectory thing
Right,
here.
okay.
It's like how much do I factor into what I was planning to accomplish? So I think it comes back to my own expectations of what I can accomplish. And I think that's too analytical, frankly. That's just too recursive. Usually my subconscious tells me what to do. And frankly, that's what happened to me. I mean, I left the U.S. at a very young age. I was studying there and working at 18 or 19, and I just realized, no, I could not do this anymore. I could not be in these rooms with people who were saying the things in the kinds of ways they were saying the things that they were saying. And I had to go somewhere where that would be different. So I came here.
What are the immovable objects in your life, and what are the unstoppable forces?
Unstoppable forces is easier. It sort of more defines the person. And I would say integrity, just the inability to live with hypocrisy, the opposite thereof. So, and once it's conscious, it's known and acknowledged, living with hypocrisy for me is very, very difficult. It just sort of becomes a grinding day in, day out, know that you're not living who you are, or doing something you don't believe in, or hanging out with people you don't like because of, and that's hypocrisy. It's like I'm espousing something which I fundamentally don't believe in. And so I can't really do that myself, and I can't be around people and be involved with things that aren't integrally linked to that at such a fundamental level. It calls into question their purpose.
Given how important it is, I just want to define the terms. How do you differentiate between hypocrisy and contradiction? Because I think being able to live with contradiction is very important. Being able to live with hypocrisy maybe is a failing.
Well, it's consciousness for one thing. That to be hypocritical, one has to be conscious of the hypocrisy, and then I think it has to be done in a a purposeful way, which is, so I suppose, what conscious, is a step perhaps beyond conscious.
Is there like malice or deceitfulness that's involved in hypocrisy? Or like what's the difference between a hypocrisy and a contradiction?
I would say a contradiction exists in that we live in a society where not everything is made up of the way we would like it. So we live in contradiction. We live in, and sometimes we can't do everything we want. We have to do things we don't like. That's all true. Actively defending that, pushing it on others in a conscious way, supporting the very thing that hurts us and hurts the individual even, but certainly I would extend it to us, this notion of society. That's hypocrisy.
So maybe we found something like maybe contradiction is the immovable object and integrity is the unstoppable force.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, if you mean by contradiction, the fact that there are differences in society, we need to work them out, and that, a constructive, positive sort of approach to it, as opposed to an approach which clearly does harm, in my view, and again, it's a subjective view, unacceptable harm, because the hypocrisy is my personal view. I'm not claiming that what I view as hypocrisy is what everybody should see.
It seems like good faith is an important component of it, that you treat contradiction which exists and act in good faith to either resolve it or transcend it or what have you.
No, it ties back to a philosophy of society and action that through discovery, through the experience of others, and through factual investigation, one can, in fact, identify solutions and to resolve those contradictions. And the hypocrisy is when one sort of favors an approach which explicitly or otherwise explicitly rules that out in the favor of a preconceived view of life.
If one looked in the mirror or were given feedback from a coach, a trusted advisor, and realized that one had hypocrisy in one's life somehow, minor or major, how would you advise them to work to build integrity from the discovery of that flaw?
It's a great question. And so it comes back to this idea of strategy for the individual, and what does it take to develop what does that process look like? What is a strategy process? I think that's what that is. And let's start with to develop integrity in your life. I mean, first of all, I would say find the joy, that there has to be joy. If there is no joy, what's the purpose? Why do this? There has to be a starting point. That's the truest, most integral, most authentic part of oneself, is the joy, the thing that puts you into flow. So know what that is and get there. And then a lot of interaction, just like get out there, talk to people. They'll help you. And most people, my experience, will genuinely help. They are interested in sort of, maybe not all the time, but like if you come up and say, hey, how do I do more of this? Or how do I get more of that? They'll give you an idea, and then you should talk to more people so that, work it out. But yeah, that's the process of that, is doing the work to know what puts one into flow and to find the joy, and then doing the work to get out there and have conversations about that. And so wow. And then maybe one gets a notion of utility out of it, but it's very subjective. So it's like my utility, my joy may or may not be yours, and very likely it isn't.
So a big thing for me is like, how do we bring presence with us outside of our daily meditation or outside the podcast studio when we walk out the doors and when we're out there, we're doing the stuff? How do we bring presence with us? How do we cultivate it so that it's a moment to moment to moment to moment to moment thing, not a slot on the calendar or a quarterly review?
I don't know if we do. I think that's a bit like the rat hitting the lever in the maze to get the sugar rush, and then eventually it kills them. So, I mean, and I think that's
dashing my dream.
Yeah, sorry, but I'm doing it with a smile. So you can't see that, but that's true. Because it's not who we are. We're not built that way. We're not built to live in joy and flow all the time. We're built to experience it. And if we were in it all the time, I think we wouldn't know what it felt like. We would, essentially be unconscious. I mean, we would not be aware of ourselves as ourselves. We would be existing in this sort of experience, and I don't know who that would be. I define my flow almost as the thing that I do that puts me into flow. And so there has to be some other thing that's going on as well. And I think that if I could frame another ideal state of existence, it would be to participate in other people's flow and to sort of have a society where that was available to me. That's cool. And that allowed me, because we're the droplets in the ocean. We're ultimately, I've had a vision or two, and it's sort of, and I didn't do ayahuasca, but it was just that, we're all these individual flames, but we are united by the notion that we are flame, that we are this creation and creativity act. And now if you flame all the time, wow, you combust yourself right into nothing. Taking a break, literally breathing, sort of seeing others, being part of who others are, their creative activity, which should fuel us, because you look, and also, I have a deep suspicion of people who spend a lot of time by themselves, because I think that they become very self-referential. We need oxygen. We're a collective species. There's no example of human society built on hermits. It doesn't happen. So we like solitude, but we need company. So that's, the thing that we should certainly carry with us, the memory of that. And we have great neuroscience knowing that, we can do that, and so let's carry it with us. But let's also, in that sense, give back, give to others by being an appreciative audience, by being engaged, and removing the barriers to that if one is very mission driven, if that's one's thing. But every artist and everybody, I think, is like that. We have a craft, we have an ability, we have a thing that we're good at, and we're good at it because we like it, because we do it well, and therefore we spend more time on it. And if we're available, if we cultivate the practice of empathy, then we can broadcast it. I think that's the challenge, that we have this balance between what we feel to be ourselves and our creativity and our potential, and what the audience, the organism expects or wants. And I think in general, to be back to my sort of like very cynical self, I suppose, to be viable, you have to find the middle ground. And successful artists, we know them because they had an impact. They reached people, and they compromised, if we want to put it that way. But they found what was true about themselves, and they accomplished it, and they found an audience for that. So that's kind of the idea, that we create things that have a market, have an audience. And I've observed this, of course. great flowering of artistic universes and ecosystems come with the development of very strong economies. It's not an accident. It's a byproduct.
Yeah, maybe what we're describing is just the difference between indie and pop. Pop sets out to give the people what they want.
Yeah.
And
the motivation.
Don't worry too much about how innovative and artistic it is. Just, that this loop is going to sound good with this sample, so just do it. And then, the indie artist is, no, I have some deep, tender thing in my soul I want to get out, and some small number of people really appreciate that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm probably less on that side. I appreciate folks who, create a story that is their own, and do so in a conscious and continuous fashion. So Sinead, just a beautiful person in terms of what I got out of her. I admit it's a subjective view, but those are heroes for me.
Who are some of your other heroes?
Oh, lots. I have heroes, and I'm going to start with a caveat in that I don't believe in role models.
Oh,
mostly because I think we can get something out of everyone.
Yeah,
and that everybody has feet of clay.
Okay.
There is nothing that says I should be this other person. I can only be myself, and I will not be someone else.
Feet of clay.
We all have feet of clay, and we so all our idols, they all have feet of clay. They all have things that are wrong with them, the things that I wouldn't want to be or wouldn't want to do. So all of that. So no role models for me, but things I can learn for sure. And so things I can learn from people, I have lots, and I strive to find that in all sorts of people. And I don't go too much for historical figures because I literally don't know them. So it's not like I can sort of describe perhaps their characteristics as I read in books, but I don't know them. So in the terms of current events and sort of people I know, my 8th grade English teacher, so he would be happy to hear this, Brainerd Frederick Phillipson, for the record. He was the kind of teacher who would post Blake on his door for people to read when he walked in. He would turn out the lights on Halloween and read us Edgar Allan Poe. He would have reading competitions where you got a point for every 100 pages, but if it was a good book, you got 2 points. And he got me to memorize a Shakespearean sonnet, which I remember to this day. When in disgrace with fortune in men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state. That's a hero, because he embodied that quest for learning, for the understanding of the human experience, the desire to communicate it to a classroom of eighth grade kids in Boston. And it's like, wow, it's amazing. And I kept in touch. So that's a hero. My father is a hero. I mean, he created things. My mother is a hero. She created things.
What did they create?
Well, so my dad, well, there's a complicated subject, but besides creating me and my brother, he, for many years of his life, was the leader of something called the Foundation for the Establishment of an International Criminal Court. So he has his own Wikipedia. And yeah, that was it, the International Criminal Court at The Hague. So he was responsible for supporting the ideas of codes, commissions, courts, and corrections, and international laws, the sharp edge of the sword in defense of human rights. So I grew up with a lot of that. It is an incredible vision and ultimately a reality, and I think personally the only way we will establish global governance in a very real way. My mom, also creator, spent 30 plus years at UNICEF. And sort of taking care of children in everywhere from Kenya to Botswana and Geneva and wherever, Washington, so D.C. But yeah, I think just sort of dedicated again to that cause. Is sort of mission-driven, you can hear it, but also just sort of a vision of what the way the world could be. So it filled me with appreciation.
What kind of vision do you have for what the world could be?
Well, I guess it goes back to hypocrisy. I wish it would be a more authentic world. I think if we removed what I will call bad actors, from the public sphere, or were quicker at least at identifying them, that we would move more quickly towards a resolution of the contradictions that are real. And they are real. I mean, I deal a lot in affordable housing. And so affordable housing is the byproduct of capitalism because it's essentially a contradiction between the desire of people to find a convenient source of savings to generate income for their retirement and sort of basically preserve wealth for multi-generational, and the desire of people to live somewhere. So that's the contradiction. And it's not unresolvable. It absolutely is. And folks who take positions like either side is intrinsically evil or wrong are essentially delaying the process of resolving the contradiction. So I'm all in favor of a world where those contradictions are resolved faster. And that's my purpose.
How do we develop the judgment to tell which trade-offs we need to accept and live with, and which we can power through? And so you give this example of affordable housing where it seems like there is a contradiction here, but you've explored with some really interesting innovations on how to bust out of that contradiction.
So the dimension that's usually not explored in all of this is time. And so because I would not frame it as an either or, of course it's an and. We should do both. We should not accept the contradiction. There's no reason we should say this is appropriate for 50,000 people to be living on the streets of Los Angeles and another 30,000 in cars and just say, well, that's just the way it is. So no, that's not. Just like it's not appropriate for a caste system to exist in India and sort of disenfranchise. That's my father speaking now, sort of the fundamental rights of the individual and the Declaration of Human Rights. So all that's not acceptable, but it's also important to understand that in order to unlock it, you can't just wish it away. One has to understand why it is. Otherwise, one's just substituting a different problem, which is called non-consensual activity or forcing people to do something as opposed to actually addressing the reason the thing happened. What is it? In the case of affordable housing, as I said, there's this conflict between the notion of the sacred nature of property rights, which guarantee our future earnings. And I always start there, as opposed to the right to shelter that exists for every human being in a city. And the ironic thing is that the one, in fact, in a broader sense, if one steps back and looks at society as a whole, guarantees the other. in that a society which fundamentally disenfranchises a significant and growing portion of its people ultimately eats its own face, which cannot be good for the property owners in that society. They will not be. So if in fact everybody was to step back a little bit and take a look at the circle of life, or whatever you want to call it, it's like, gosh, this is a good investment, because either build them houses or scrape them off the streets or accept the consequences of a violent dissolution of society. And then in the interim, it's like, well, it's cost me money today and my discount rate is different. Now, that discount rate question is very subjective. There are some people who say, well, I'm going to live another 10 years. My discount rate is infinite. I care nothing about anything else than the next 10 years. Okay, so that's a very subjective point of view, as opposed to someone who says, I really deeply care about my grandchildren, in which case I care for, my discount rate is very low. Discount rate determines cost of money, determines how much you are willing to invest. And if you have a society which is fundamentally not willing to invest, well, your society is about to die. And so I would argue this problem does ultimately solve itself, in that we don't have to worry about those societies that choose not to invest because they won't be around for very much longer. But on the other
there's
hand,
externalities to that, right?
Well, the Mayans failed to invest in aqueducts, and they built statues to the rain gods. It was fairly cheaper, I suppose. But yeah, eventually they died because, drought is a thing. In the case of affordable housing, either invest in housing or face the consequences. And the consequences look like slowing growth, lower productivity, higher costs, a 50% of your city budget being devoted to the police. And I'm describing Los Angeles right now. That's logic. And so let us step back. Let's see the bigger picture. And then, let's put our mind to work on this, because there are unlocks. The wild thing is that we're very creative when we put ourselves to it.
How do you help people zoom out and adopt longer-term horizons?
Somehow getting them to see the individual. I have a colleague who, in my research work, who used to say, look, people would ask him, we're a company, why are we doing so much research work? Why are we putting this out there? And he would say, CEOs are people too. They care about the same things everybody cares about. They care about diversity. They care about inclusion. They care about, is this the environment? They care about growth and incomes. They care about the same things. And they care as individuals. They have a role, but they also care about it as individuals. And so that was the challenge we had, was like, how do we frame a narrative that speaks to them as individuals and helps them see that we take individuals seriously? So I think it starts with the idea that one takes the individual seriously. One takes context into account, the people they hang out with. How would it possibly make sense to engage someone who listens to a particular source of news 24 hours a day from someone who doesn't listen to radio or internet? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. So we need a omni-channel approach, sort of a sense for how we help get through. And then we help people. I think it's all about this interaction. It's like we should identify the people who are left behind, who are isolated, who are not getting input, and for whatever reason, and then figure out, well, how does that change? I'm a real believer in the organism, that we're built to be together. We're not built to be alone, and that's the story of cities. I'm an urbanist at heart, and so we come together, we experience each other, we learn from that, we become better, we solve our problems. And because the alternative, it can't be true. I mean, if it was wrong, we'd all be dead a long time ago, because the first cities would have gone terribly badly, and we would all revert back to being nomadic hunters. That's clearly not what we do. So I'm an optimist about all of that. And I think we're on the cusp of something truly, truly amazing. I mean, I just think that every chart that one shows of human activity and the potential of the individual is exponential. It's not even geometric. It's just exponential. If you take it back from since when, yes, I'm afraid I'm a Darwinist. So we emerged from the fishes, it's like long, flat, and then vertical. It's like in the last 200 years. And so this goes
what are you measuring when you talk about that? Productivity?
Productivity, the capacity of the individual, the everyday person to do anything, whether it's to read, eat in terms of calorific consumption, to produce, to, I think, again, like the physical measures are pretty wild because it's a fairly slow moving thing. But we're a lot taller than we used to be. And it's just amazing. And now we've harnessed the atom. No, we've harnessed the electron and the math. We have math now to help us, and we're actually putting math to work in AI and learning algorithms. And so, no, I'm a huge believer in our kids are going to just do crazy things, and we won't understand it, but that's okay. It says, we're generation 1.0 or whatever.
How do we either prepare the kids or just prepare ourselves for that exponential change?
It's a great question. I love it. And I hate to say nice things about Elon, but he espouses an aspect of his philosophy that I can relate to, which was that, so we've created something that's fundamentally smarter than we are, and which is the capacity for learning at scale in the form of AI or quantum-enabled AI or large, and let's see, it's a baby thing. We'll figure out what it's going to. But the reality is that it's certainly a lot faster and can solve problems faster than the amazing wetware that we have in our brain or wherever it resides through our system. And so the interface is kind of the problem. So how does one reconcile the interface? And so that's the challenge. It's like, how does one get better at using the tools that we have created? And because they're very powerful tools. And I think that's the key for the kids. It's like, how do they get better at interacting with this capability that they built? And for that matter, for the old people. So I was on a panel one time about smart cities. I love this story. And we started talking about banking. And the other panelist was a German mayor. I can't remember who. I think it was Olaf Scholz, but I don't remember. And a Singaporean minister for something. And so the German mayor said, well, that's why we keep one teller, human teller at every bank, so that, grandma can go to the bank and have a human interaction because we're concerned about grandma, and it sounds good. And the Singaporean was deeply offended by this. And he said, that's completely the wrong idea. That's holding back progress. And our motto is no grandma left behind. And that we have to have every grandma go online. If that means I have to assign a teenager to sit next to her, I will do so. And by the way, you'd be surprised at how quickly grandmas can go online to start stalking their grandchildren. So that's the philosophy. We need to keep up. We need to engage and enable, and we need to give people the tools they need. And that does not mean walled gardens. That's open cities. Those are, places where we can all go and learn. And yeah, we should be mindful of the risks involved. But yeah, sure, there's only one way forward. There's no backward path here.
I'm listening on audiobook to Rick Rubin, The Creative Act. Rick Rubin, the Def Jam Records co-founder.
Right. I've heard the name, but honestly don't know so well.
Mm-hmm. He's got his own story and wiki. You can look it up. But, has worked with a lot of creative people and has written this book about, it's called The Creative Act, A Way of Being, and describes just every moment as being an act of creation. And our conversation is making me kind of reframe it or paraphrase it in terms of strategy. Maybe every moment is an act of strategy in trying to pursue that authenticity and find creative solutions to dismantle hypocrisy. And I think a theme of, I've mentioned before and I keep coming back to is making that a way of being rather than an activity where, strategy is like a slot on the calendar that we're gonna do this. Okay, now it's time for strategy, right?
Yeah.
But to be strategic. And I know you took some of the air out of my tires that I can't be that all the time, that I can't be in flow all the time, that I can't, OD on my sugar dopamine hit. But maybe just integrate it.
Yeah. But no, I mean, let's again define our terms. So flow is not strategy. Maybe the regulation of flow is strategy. It's saying, when can I do this, or what takes me to flow? That's a conscious impulse that has been decentralized to the governance that exists within ourselves as individuals and conscious individuals at that. That's strategy. So, and in that sense, yeah, I would think one should have a strategic mindset like all the time, and be essentially situationally aware, which is about the idea you're a droplet in the ocean. Droplets have surface tension. So it's like being a little drop of mercury in an ocean of mercury or something. I'm not getting the physical analogy. My daughter will criticize me for this. But the idea that one has something that pulls one together, that constitutes this idea of us as individuals. And then we have something which also allows us to recognize each other. And we do so in the form of what we call human. And because, and some people go beyond human, they would include, plants, animals, and anything else. So that would be quite special. So we have a flexible boundary on defining the others. And then we balance. We decide how much of this is going to be about us and how much is it about anybody else. And that's our strategy. And I think we should maintain that awareness at all times. It's not a good idea to have, even when you're in the middle of all of your flow and doing something that if one is like doing this completely in isolation of anybody else and without regard to anybody else, that's the person who's playing piano at 3 a.m. and is about to have a very rude awakening. So that's a bad idea. So, I think society has a way of intruding on that, but also, going out and floating on a raft for 90 days by yourself is probably also not optimal. It just it's a better thing because I actually feel like we're not built again to be in isolation. That's not somehow our system. And if we had design parameters, it would include a certain measure of interaction with others. Maybe we do.
I just worry that some people have not found peace or integrity in themselves. And rather than working towards it, they go out.
Yeah.
And maybe to some extent they need to. You need to get out there. You need to, that is part of the healing or part of the growing and experience. But sometimes it becomes you never patch the inside, and actually at scale with enough people with enough holes reaching out in what can also be a form of desperation. We're not helping each other. We're it's a million people who can't swim, who never learned to swim, holding on to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas if we all just did our own little thrashing and figured out how to keep our heads up above water, then maybe all together we could swim to a brighter shore.
I hear you, and I'm interesting that that's the way that came across, because I know I'm a big believer in doing the work for oneself as well. I mean, part of the work is going out, part of the work is going in, and the work about sort of identifying what's the joy. That's internal work. No one else can tell me what the joy is. And people who say believe in the hereafter and that's your joy, well, they're selling me something. So I may decide that for myself, but that's not. So I find the joy is the internal part of the work.
Part of the work of finding out what your joy is going out and doing a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, try new things. I mean, that was my dad's educational philosophy, throw a lot of things at the wall for the kids. So it's fascinating.
Could you speak on this issue for somebody who is in their late 30s or 40s and is working maybe specifically in finance or management consulting and doesn't have that same youthful, expansive, the world is your oyster opportunity. They have obligations. They have responsibilities. They formed an identity of self that is by many conventions successful and, maybe feel they should feel really good, but they don't.
That's a fun question. And, I can speak from lived experience. What would have been helpful is for someone to tell me, where's the discomfort in your life? What's the thing that just doesn't fit? Is there any of that? In most people, there's quite a bit of that. So it's like, okay, fine. So now one has identified a thing that's sort of like, or just a general feeling of discomfort. And then
what if it's everything? What if it's like, well, my job and my marriage and my
lots of stuff. Okay, fine. So we've accepted the case.
Even though
change.
On the surface they look
case
fine.
Of change. Again, to take it from a consultant, we sort of need to proceed in a Larry left brain way about all this. So okay, fine. So where's the Where's the thing when you're doing it that you basically, again, don't look at your watch or your phone? It's like, it's all good. You're in it. Time is passing you by. You didn't even notice. And, or that you have like, oh my God, it's so much fun that I do this, even though I know it's like not really work related, something like that. And then step by step, I'll just say like, expand the boundaries. It's like, do a little bit more of that, like every day. And like, or, if you can't do it every day, like every week. And it's like, and then just keep asking yourself, why am I not doing this more? And if something is getting in your way, saying like, oh, I don't like this, or I'm concerned about that, fine. What can one do to know how close are we getting to the danger zone, the thing when you'll get fired or you'll lose your family or something bad will happen to you financially or whatever. Everybody's concerned about different things. And then set up an early warning system. Are you getting close to that moment? Like go ask somebody, am I still good? Is my boss going to fire me? For me, it was about my kids. It's like, I realized that I was not spending enough time literally to have a relationship with my children. And I was enjoying the heck out of what I was doing and doing more of it and exploring more of it. But I was worried that I was going to basically lose them. And so I said, fine, I'm going to be a consultant. I'm going to create a spreadsheet. So I did. I have a spreadsheet, which I kept for the ages of the kids from age 4 to 18, which basically set a target for how many nights I would spend at home, which I translated into breakfasts at home because that's when they would actually be there. And I set a target of 60%. I said, my expectation is I'm a smart human being. I should be able to find out 60% of nights at home. And I set one other target, which was I need to have 1 hour a day for myself. And so there are 24 hours in the day. Surely you're a smart enough human being that you can find out 1 hour a day. I mean, it's only less than 5% practically. You should be able to do that. And then I kept track. And after 15 years of that, I wound up at 72% of a rolling 3-month average of nights at home. And pretty much, pretty good rate. The one a day, stuff happened. It was fine. I got everything done. And it was a crutch because I'm a very analytical person when it comes to that kind of stuff. But it was a very useful crutch. It just kept me aware of my trade-offs, the things where was my joy? Was I pursuing it? And was I putting anything else at risk that I was also equally joyful about, but I needed to have it? I was more of a wealth building versus income building, if you want to put it that way. So were they preserving the growth and the value of the stock while even as I was generating the income that I needed to through income in the sense of joy? It's like each and every day, because I felt there was a contradiction. So that was that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it's practical.
Super helpful.
What's the best way to help integrate non-rational forms of knowledge and humanity into our work?
Oh, wow. What a great question. Great leaders. I mean, for helping people to become great leaders, because we're dealing with the influenceable population, first of all. So, I mean...
In your experience, what proportion of the population is that?
10. It's like 40% are sure they're doing it the right way. 40% are sure, or 10 to 20, whatever. 40% are sure that they can't do it, and everybody else is sort of influenceable. Okay. Cool. And and at the moment in time, or they're too busy or whatever. So it's 10 to 20. But for that population that is available, again, so availability, and motivated to do something because they're not too sure, is for those folks, okay, so if there's a problem, we have to identify what kind of issue it is, what problem it is. So that's my left brain. But my gut is telling me just, first of all, relate to individuals as individuals and then see the connection to one's own role and responsibility in society. So, for example, I like to ask CEOs, how many of your employees are homeless? Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. By employees, I include the people who clean your offices and provide your security guards and all the rest of it. Nobody has any idea. It's not hard, but you just have to ask yourself the question. And you can say, well, society will take care of it if they made bad choices. Yeah, you are actually paying them. You are the society. That was it, your choice. And get to grips with that idea. And if you're the libertarian that you claim yourself to be, you're perfectly fine with that, which I hope you're fine when that's the reason for employee theft. And it's just like, be honest with yourself. So I think and honesty comes with lifting off the blinkers that say, this is the way things are because whatever. They've always been that way because they're, original sin or, they're just, I don't care. It's like, well, fine, then, live with the consequences of one's points of view. Leopards ate my face. So I would encourage people to take that, I don't call it necessarily radical transparency, but just a really good long look at the role that they play in society and how that affects others around them. And not shield oneself for the consequences of those judgments. And so, yeah, that's my main sort of thought on how people can get better. But then know that there is such a deep well of altruistic feeling within the human spirit, to come back to that there are people out there who live for doing nothing else than helping others. They are empathetic. They are deeply connected to each other. That's who they are. That's how they rationalize their existence. And so, fine, take it for what it's worth, but seek help. Reach out, have conversations, and do so in the most unexpected, innovative way. So I tell people I've had three, this is sort of a segue, but I have three words that describe the secrets of my professional success. Agility, quick to respond. Innovation, that's this, do the unexpected. And distance, far enough away. So one has the space to actually sort of explore, experiment, try new things.
Expand on the distance. What does that mean? Distance
means a safe space. It's the idea that one is not in the place where the consequences of one's actions will be so immediately visited on oneself that one feels compelled to constrain one's actions because the downside is way bigger than the upside, or is a lot more immediate. Distance creates safe space, which creates the opportunity for agility and innovation. Innovation comes from the periphery, in the words of one of my colleagues. And I find that to be a very true thing. So my personal history, being in China, allowed me to feel like, yeah, I can try this. I can do this personally, for me. If I was sitting in a place where I felt like I was being scrutinized on a very regular basis, that would be a lot more challenging.
I'm trying to square that with other theories of innovation I've heard, which is, getting right. It's like, don't go and innovate in a cave. Be in the muck of it. Get on the factory floor. Be touching everything. Be talking to everybody.
Yeah.
That's where the innovation comes from.
But that's true. I mean, these are not contradictory. These are actually the same thing. So the Japanese have a word, durokusai, which means the fingers in the mud. Is that if you're not durokusai, if you do not have your fingers in the mud, you don't understand what's going on. And you can't make change happen. You can't change yourself. You can't change them. You can't change anything. You're just sitting in the air. You're in the clouds. And that's very, very true. So we need to be durokusai. We need to have our fingers in the mud. What's the amazing thing is when you realize you are bringing something to the mud. You're bringing some unique, personal, you're the droplet in the ocean that's sitting there waiting to receive it, and you're creating the green revolution. And that changes me, but it changes them too. And that's how you know it happened. So it's like, yeah, wow, it's different. That's innovation, that's direction, that's purpose. For me, that's what I do. I catalyze, I tell stories, which is my unique thing. I add that seed to the fertile soil and watch what happens. It's like, and if it doesn't happen, well, then that didn't work. Let's try something else. But that's the whole idea. And
bring
Johnny
it to
Appleseed.
The mud. Yeah.
So
my mom's favorite story was a monk on his deathbed, and all of the monks gather around to hear his final wise words, and the most senior elder disciple says, "Oh, wise one, tell us, at this end of your life, what have you learned?" And the old monk says, "Life is like a river." And his wisdom reverberates from that senior elder monk. Life is like a river, life is like a river, all the way out across the gathered monks, until this one little peasant monk at the very edge of the crowd, at the periphery, says, "Life is like a river. What does that mean?"
Goes all the way.
And the question reverberates back. What does that mean? What does that mean? It goes back to the old monk. "Oh, wise one,
before you go, tell us what life is like a river. What does that mean? And the old monk pauses so long they're worried he's gone. And finally he says, okay, maybe life's not like a river. And my mom loved that story because the monk had the courage and the wisdom to really tackle life's hard questions and spend a whole life dedicated to them. And then was willing to take a challenge from the periphery and you're like, all right, maybe he's not. You just hold deep ideas lightly.
No, absolutely. I mean, oh, wow. I love that last line because holding deep ideas lightly, because three things. All right. That's exactly what the priest said to me on my marriage. It's like, okay, don't take serious things so seriously. It's like, whatever. It's like, we get to make very few decisions in our life. This was one of them. It's like, but, go into it with lighthearted feelings because, how do you know? Anyway, so be happy. So there's one. Two, again, how do we know this hasn't happened? We're just one of the many players in the ocean. And so I'm a big believer in Fermi's paradox. It's like, if they're out there, where the fuck are they? So well, maybe they're telling us something. It's like, this is actually quite risky. You may or may not get there. And who knows, right? So this is not guaranteed. There is no promise that we survive any of this. And so fine, shouldn't that liberate you? Shouldn't that make us feel like that life is precious, that we owe it to ourselves to invest ourselves fully in each and every day without preconceptions about what's possible or not? So just go for it. And so that's where I come out on that.
Yeah. We forget that though.
I'm actually optimistic because I that's the third thing is like, I think we're good. I actually do. I actually think we're good. I think we are going to make it work out. Maybe this is self-fulfilling prophecies. I tend to hang out with positive people because the alternative is shorter lifespan.
Self-fulfilling prophecy or self-delusion? Which one?
Either way, I don't care. It's like, but I think we're good. I actually think that the objective record, such as we have it in terms of any measure of human progress, let's stick with life expectancy, is very, very positive. And so maybe this is all a gigantic build-up to a catastrophic collapse, but then, hey, that's your opinion, man. Yeah. So,
it's like the guy that's predicting the Minsky moment every quarter.
I really hope he never listens to this. Refer to my son as the dude. After The Big Lebowski, of course. Because it's like, that's your opinion, man. Because it's like the dude abides. And I think that's a healthy attitude. That's the dude abides. We should not presume disaster. We should presume success because the alternative is literally unthinkable.
Life is very short and very precious. And in all things, there is an opportunity cost. And so I'm deeply moved that you spent this time with me.
Well, I am happy to have done so. It was, I got a high ROI on this one in the sense that I like telling this story. It helps me. It really does. And there's more pages to this chapter, but I like the way the conversation went, and I enjoy the context. Well, thank you.
Thank you. You've given me so much, and hopefully our audience too. I have no doubt.
It'll be fun. I look forward to hearing from them.
Yeah. Any final words of wisdom? A parting shot?
Well, it's in that spirit. We have to. Here I stand. I can do no other. It's. I forget whose famous last words, but I like to think it was someone's, is that it is important to define oneself. The qualities of the individual are just that. They're unique. They're who we are. We cannot apologize for them in as much as they are intrinsic to our definition of self. And they are who we are. So I encourage folks to figure that out.
Thanks for listening. To support, please check out the links to our sponsors in the show notes, follow me on LinkedIn, and of course, subscribe to The Essence of Investing wherever you get your podcasts. With that, I am signing off, your happy and humble host, Jonathan Reckman. See you next time.